Hello everybody, my name's Neil Bennett. I am the Business Development Director for Simulation and Training at Wärtsilä Voyage, and I'm joined today by my colleague James Lee, the Director of our Digital Academy.
Hello everybody and welcome.
So today we'd like to talk to you about the route to digital learning success for 2022 and beyond, adapting the passage plan with lessons learned from the pandemic. So let's look at COVID's impact on wider education. According to the United Nations brief from August of 2020, just the initial impact of COVID affected more than 1.6 billion learners in 190 countries, and it actually had a negative impact on over 95% of students in one way or another. So we've had many educational challenges to be faced: closed maritime schools, reduced class sizes, social distancing. In maritime, lack of training berths for cadets, making it difficult or even impossible to complete sea time. Seafarers stuck in lockdown or unable to travel to reach ships or colleges, and even reductions or freezes in new cadet enrollments. So all these factors have led to what is widely accepted as one of the main impacts on education, which is learning loss. In wider education, estimates suggest that over the 2 years of the pandemic, some students may have lost between 3 months to a full year of education, which of course depends on the quality of the online instruction that they had. And of course, all this stress has undoubtedly led to mental health issues for seafarers aboard or ashore that has a further impact on the effectiveness of training. There's undoubtedly been a major shift and strain on the whole system of maritime education, not just financial, but the need to rapidly move to online learning, and with it, reinvention of how many courses have to be taught has really added significant workloads to educators. And it's highlighted the disparity between the haves and the have-nots. It's a major concern in general, is this widening gap in educational opportunities because of the pandemic between developed and developing nations. So what are the lessons learned from the pandemic in maritime training? I think perhaps more than ever, the challenges of educating during the pandemic have underscored what we already knew, which is that one size for education does not fit all, particularly where it comes to student needs and the way that they learn. I don't think this needs debate. It's clear to anyone who's taken part in group learning. Yet we continue to regulate and set policy on what is truly a one-size-fits-all approach. Educators know that students' needs vary, so let's give the educators and the students the flexibility to decide how and when they learn in the future. And as a simulator supplier deploying cloud systems across the world and trying to meet needs of customers, we learned very quickly that also technically one size doesn't fit all. Whether it be the quality of the internet connection or the type of PC equipment available for seafarers to use, it really varied greatly across the world. And it's clear to see that there's also a big difference generally in the digital literacy between the young and the more mature seafarer.
And picking up on that digital literacy points, another key assumption that we have to challenge is one that we've been dealing with maybe for 20 years since digital learning and e-learning has appeared, is that the quality of digital learning just isn't as good as a classroom. You'll never learn as much online as you do in a classroom. Well, we've had an interesting situation the last 18 months of digital learning and remote learning being rolled out and scaled across the world, and from that, we've been able to actually get some meaningful data to challenge those assumptions. And there's a number of surveys showing that e-learning itself, if it's of quality, there can be up to 5 times more material participants will learn without increasing the time they spend in training. So the actual volume of knowledge transfer can radically increase. Now, we've all got assumptions based on the past where we don't retain our learning. We've all sat there doing compliance e-learning in the last 20 years by clicking through PowerPoints. Well, modern e-learning today can massively increase retention rates because of the digital platforms, the digital delivery mechanisms, and the fact we've got digital natives learning. So face-to-face retention, whilst it has a good social aspect, we'll talk about later, has a far lower retention rate, and this is proven empirical data based on assessments. The notion that digital learning is expensive for us to invest in is a sound one. Again, we've all been seeing the costs of many different forms of digital content drop, and digital learning is at the forefront. It was too expensive maybe 5-10 years ago, but today it's remarkable the difference in unit costs of digital learning through the different delivery mechanisms like simulation and cloud. Was Dow Chemical, for example, a major international manufacturing firm, across their plants across the world, moved away from physical classrooms. And not only was the cost of their learning delivery less, but because of the delivery cost, their training course dropped from $95 per learner to $11 per learner, which is significant. And there's interesting correlation between the stock market indices of the revenue generated per employee on publicly available numbers on companies that invest in training through technology, because the revenue per generation of each individual employee is actually proven to be 26% higher. And that's actually been rising over the last 18 months. And then the good old adage, which is for all of us in the training world, is we just don't have time to add more training. Well, interesting that the core message here is that a study from Brandon Hall, which is a significant consulting firm in e-learning, found that there is typically 40 to 60% less employee time needed learning through e-learning compared to a traditional classroom setting. So in fact, we're not adding another layer of training, we're actually reducing the time spent on training.
So continuing on the theme of challenging old assumptions, one may be to challenge the need to still focus as much as we do on some of the traditional training maritime skills. It does seem logical to provide, good solid foundation of knowledge to mariners. And some level of traditional skills is, I think, still very important, but we have to address the balance and ensure that the training focus really now shifts to digital navigation on the bridge and the use of digital equipment in the engine room or in cargo operations. Recent MAAB study of ECTIS application and usability, it's a great read and gives us a good example. It highlights some of the dangers in not moving beyond transitional training requirements, whereby a focus on paper chart voyage planning in training leads actually to confusion and safety issues for the users, where they're mixing principles between old paper chart methods and those required to plan using ENCs, modern voyage planning software and associated tools. And then one more, which again is potentially something that gets me into trouble for even mentioning, it would be challenging whether sea time is more important than simulated time. Well, here the thing is, sea time and simulation time, they're both very important. According to learning research, 70% of what employees learn is from their experiences. Only 20% is from their social interactions, and 10% only is from traditional learning sources. So how does the simulator tie in? Well, the simulator is simply a tool that emulates the real work environment. So it's recreating those real onboard experiences. It provides that experiential learning whereby learners can acquire knowledge faster, they can retain it for longer, because they can experience and apply the concepts learned repeatedly, and they can do it in a realistic, safe, and controlled environment. So this drives changes in behavior and allows learners to experiment. They can make mistakes and learn from them, which is so important. So this isn't really a question of one or the other, but I would contend at least that simulation is vastly underutilized in maritime training. And now with simulation going online and being virtual, it's a lot less expensive, it's more accessible, much more flexible. So perhaps we need to challenge some assumptions and seek out new ways to use it. Lesson learned number 3 would be the quality of content and training materials is really critical for engagement when you make a move to online learning. It's not as easy as taking the content you already have and simply delivering it remotely. Often the content is going to need redesign if it's going to be effective and engaging. And if any of you have had your kids learning online, you will know quite clearly that the average attention span is about 1 millisecond. And what do your kids do when they disengage from the lesson that they should be on? They reach for their cell phone, and then they engage for what it seems like an eternity, because the medium is providing them something that is utilizing technology, making things fun, visual, and memorable. And we have to do that with our training. We have to perhaps be a little bit more like the YouTubers if we're going to actually keep the attention of the trainees.
And echoing that is some evidence here. If we are going to keep the attention of the trainees, and if we're going to use the best and richest content, we need to approach it for the right reason, which is not moving to digital just to save money. In fact, the evidence is shown from a survey of several thousand global training managers that the #1 reason for adopting online learning was not to reduce training costs. Slightly higher as a share of the pie chart there, you can see the top left quadrant, is actually the improving the pedagogical effectiveness. Improving pedagogical effectiveness is a fancy way of saying learning that sticks, learning that works. A richer, more content-driven digital delivery of learning has the byproduct effect of actually reducing training costs, even if that wasn't your intention, because by having a richer learning experience, there's shorter time to competence, greater skills transfer, greater ROI. However, if you approach it just from a reducing training cost perspective, I truly believe, and the evidence shows, that you're going to get an inferior learning experience. There's also some further data that talks about the blending of what we're talking. We're not saying, again, let's go digital, let's throw everybody some links and get them to do some e-learning. The first chart is really interesting. It's about the time it takes to complete training. The reds, which is titled VR, really refers to simulation, augmented reality, virtual and extended reality. It's clear that those sort of immersive simulated environments have the shortest time to complete training. The longest is the classroom, and somewhere in between is e-learning. But the solution isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, as we've said. We had to look a little bit deeper, and some interesting work done last year about multitasking and distraction rates. So the classroom was almost like a baseline. People are somewhat distracted, and when they are distracted, it's very easy to get back on focus because they're in a social room surrounded by people. E-learning has a much greater distraction rate and a much greater time to come back on stream and work out what I'm doing, and by not being distracted by your phone, etc. And lastly, that simulation, augmented, extended virtual reality world has the least distraction rate and also the shortest time to get back to focus to finish and complete that training. But as we also know, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, because you couldn't put somebody into a simulator for 8 hours. So the message there is the future is blended. And when you talk about blended, we don't forget the human experience. So we talk about blended learning as the solution. What that means is the instructor, the physical classroom or the virtual classroom is not redundant. We're not looking to, as an industry, remove the people element from this. The people element is critical. And if we can extend that instructor digitally, great. But there's an interesting survey here done with a large group of Russian university students during the pandemic, several tens of thousands. And we're looking at the pros and cons of learning at a distance. And I think this can equate across all markets and geographies. There was a great benefit for the learner to plan personal time and do more, which is that talks to that reducing the time to learn skills, reducing the time in the classroom or e-learning, whatever, and improving the independent work skills. We're talking about we're talking about many digital natives coming into the industry. So they are going to be improving their work skills through the learning at a distance. And interestingly enough, the high quality of learning materials that can be studied at that convenient pace was the digital native is learning 24/7, not constantly 24/7, but throughout the day. But it's interesting that most of the students felt that the lack of in-person communication was one of the cons. It was difficult to organize the work, to have all these different links in virtual classrooms. And lastly, the lack of hands-on practice, which is where, of course, we believe simulation comes in. So the message there again is that education is a fundamentally social experience. And if we are going to move to digital for the right reasons, it goes back to it is a blended approach for your learners, your crews, your students, your staff. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Last lesson learned, but by no means the least, is that moving to digital learning is very good for the environment. A study by Britain's Open University found that producing and providing e-learning courses consumes an average of 90% less energy, and it produces 85% fewer CO2 emissions per student than conventional face-to-face courses. So, those are the lessons learned, and how do we use that to adapt the passage plan for the future of our maritime training? Unquestionably, this is a period of change in maritime training. It's a time of opportunity, not a time for compromise. So we have to adapt the plan going forward, but we must also resist the temptation to return to the status quo and simply go back to how it was pre-COVID. On a positive note, it has ignited a more rapid transition to digital learning, of course, and that gives us new opportunities. So these are really opportunities for those who are ready to grab them and proactively move quickly to realize the new reality. What are the opportunities? I think the first one is to modernize maritime training to deliver what is expected by today's digital natives. It's a chance for maritime training providers to go digital and lead this transformative change. It gives us a chance to deal with the long overdue major changes we need to STCW and the international training standards, moving them towards more blended learning and greater use of simulation. And I think lastly here, it's a great chance for digital collaboration because none of us have all of the answers, and we can find new solutions and bring together complementary technologies. So if we're going to modernize learning techniques in maritime, we do have an opportunity to bridge the gap between traditional traditional learning and for digital natives, the analog maritime training methods that we use today. And this will attract youth into the maritime industry and careers. Those digital natives, they expect a high level of freedom of choice. They will not conform to traditional scheduling. They demand some degree of anytime, anywhere learning, and it has to be at their pace via whatever device they choose. And of course, they have an incredible expectation of an immediate response and gratification. But modernization of our maritime training, it does require research to really determine how we can best do it for the best outcomes. We don't have a lot of data to prove the value of many kinds of training, let alone simulation versus traditional sea time requirements. And that hopefully will be addressed. Moving from in-person training to blended, not as simple as just delivering via a new medium. The best case scenario requires careful adaptation and in some cases a really radical renewal of the content. So we face a growing need for new skills such as instructional design and use of the associated technologies, mastering logic-based solutions such as our eTutor for allowing automated assessment. These are all very important things. And here perhaps part of the solution can be achieved through that collaboration to bring digital technologies, skills and expertise together to speed transformation. Any discussion of STCW can very quickly become controversial, which I'll try to avoid here. The latest cycle of updates to the standards are now well underway, and there's some very positive signs. So I just want to restate some of the key points that industry has suggested that are important to address. First one's removal of the obsolete. We kind of touched on that. Technology moves ever faster, and we need to get rid of some of the obsolete things to make room for the new learning. We also must have new standards that address today's and future technology, which is very challenging to do. That has to include automation and autonomy. And I know a lot of maritime training providers are already looking quite deeply into those areas. There's a suggestion that future training should start with general training, then move to specific training for different maritime sectors. That then gives defined paths to allow an ability to move from one sector to another. So tomorrow's seafarers could be more of specialists rather than generalists. And then those seafarers, we have to develop them to be tech savvy, multi-purpose, I think, with more technological, electronic and digital training. And then when it comes to virtual training, we need to identify what is most conducive to online training, because there are some things that just aren't well accepted in that way. And then the last thing here would be for the use of equivalencies and familiarization as an interim step for new technology that can then be delivered in a consistent way. So I've touched on collaboration. It really is an important thing in a time of rapid change. One such collaboration is our partnership with Ocean Technologies Group, which was announced in February of this year. Why did we enter this collaboration? Well, to begin with, through our dialogue, it was clear that our organizations had a similar vision for the future of maritime training. We also had shared goals and objectives. Both organizations have been providing solutions to maritime training for over 25 years, and both represent the largest customer bases in the industry in our respective fields. That totals over 3,000 shipping companies and maritime training providers using our educational solutions. Very importantly, then, we have complementary yet converging technologies that is designed to drive us towards that common objective of delivering more efficient, safer, and environmentally aware mariners who are properly equipped to perform in this rapidly changing digitized maritime industry. So working together, we've actually brought together our cloud-based simulation with the Ocean Learning platform, and that gives us the first steps towards creating something of a new maritime training landscape, which can then allow us to connect and collaborate with the various stakeholders. So let's have a look at how OTG's Ocean Learning platform and Wärtsilä Cloud Simulation can fit into this new landscape. So as we've discussed, until recently, maritime learning has generally been based on a infrastructure of quite separated and disconnected systems and learning events. On the one hand, OTG provided onboard training via shipping company systems, and on the other hand, we had Wärtsilä Voyage providing solutions utilizing simulation to maritime training centers for their long and short courses. But even before the pandemic, onboard and onshore training were converging and actually moving online. So by interfacing our respective cloud-based technologies, we're beginning to create a maritime learning ecosystem which can connect the shipping companies in a digital way with the maritime training providers online and bring their seafarers to the table as well to give them their learning experiences anytime and anywhere. What that means is that we're not going to cut out, obviously, all of the travel for the seafarer, but it does mean that perhaps a higher percentage of their training can be done online, or even the preparation for going to courses to make it more effective when they get there. So for any ecosystem to thrive, connectivity is key. And we use an open architecture that allows all the industry stakeholders to benefit and contribute to this. That includes various manufacturers, industry bodies, class, flag authorities, and so on. And through interconnected systems on a variety of mediums, now we begin to have the level of data from the seafarers' careers or learning journeys available in this system to seriously think about adapting the learning to the needs of those specific seafarers. We can also contemplate learning in the flow of work, because we can actually connect ships to training centers, to shipping companies, and so on and so on. So it really is an opportunity now to continue to develop these connections and the system for maritime training.
And just to finish off and summarize where we are today and where we've got to, the pandemic has really brought a sudden opportunity to reevaluate and change in a training sector that really has changed little in the last 100 years. And this paradigm shift towards remote learning solutions is happening as an amplifier, as an extender, as an accelerator of how we're already training.
Industry is definitely learning the benefits and the merits of blended learning. You've seen today some of the lessons that have been learned in a relatively short time. So to some extent, we have something of a new passage plan going forward, and we have quite a lot of momentum. There's also a lot of enthusiasm for this, whether it be seafarers, shipping companies being able to take advantage of this to gain benefits in cost savings, flexibility, efficiency, and so on. So big message, don't turn back, keep moving forward, keep driving us as a simulation and training provider to keep coming up with the new technology and move it fast forward. We've certainly been doing that in the last couple of years with these rapid changes, and we intend to continue to do that. And lastly, very important, collaboration is key. None of us have all of the answers, but together we can actually bring them together and we can accelerate the move to a more positive future. So thank you for your attention. Thank you, James, for your support, and we look forward to speaking to you all sometime in the future.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to collaborating.